I don't touch anything anymore. More women's clothes. Button-down shirt.
A dry riverbed cuts through the back of a neighborhood in Tucson, Arizona. Locals call it a wash. For nearly 2 months now, it has sat at the center of one of the most closely watched missing persons investigations in recent American history. No official statement put it there. No law enforcement press conference pointed cameras toward it. What drew attention to it was a single individual with a camera who walked systematically through that terrain, covered it on foot, and shared what he found with the world. That wash runs directly behind the home of Annie Guthrie, the daughter who picked up the phone on the morning of February 1st and reported her mother missing. The daughter whose house now sits geographically at the heart of an investigation that nearly 2 months later still cannot point to a publicly identified suspect. Yet a confirmed primary crime scene or a definitive answer to the question that has consumed this family and this country since that morning. Where is Nancy? On March 28, 2026, the 56th day of the search, a content creator conducting ground-level searches of that wash discovered something significant. Multiple clothing items lying in the same drainage channel where a pair of pants had already been flagged and submitted to authorities weeks before. The sheriff's office has been notified. Deputies are aware of the find. Everything has been photographed and posted publicly. What the law enforcement response looked like, what these items suggest about where Nancy may have been taken that night, and why a location sitting directly behind Annie's property reshapes the entire investigative picture. And that is what needs to be examined carefully right now. In cases like this, the details that appear minor rarely are. A stretch of dry riverbed, a jacket, a pair of pants. Someone who decided to walk the same ground twice. Each of those things carries weight in this investigation, and none of it has been adequately addressed in the official public record. The person who made this discovery is worth understanding before getting into what he found. Jim runs a channel called Exploring with Jim, and he has been conducting organized grid searches across the greater Tucson area since the earliest days of this case. No law enforcement credentials, no official standing in the investigation, no forensic resources. What he brings to the work is a methodical approach, physical presence in the terrain, and a willingness to return to the same areas repeatedly rather than treating a single pass as conclusive. Grid searching operates on a simple principle. You section off an area, you walk every part of it, you document everything, and then you go back because the desert is not static. Weather moves objects. Runoff redistributes debris. Vegetation shifts with the seasons and hides things that were sitting in plain view weeks earlier. A wash after a rain system looks completely different from the same wash in dry conditions. Jim applied that understanding to this location and went back a second time. The pair of pants found previously in this exact drainage channel behind Annie Guthrie's home had already connected this wash to the broader search. That earlier find was documented, reported, and passed to investigators.
Women's pants. You know, when you're out here and you're searching, you find things, it's really hard, difficult decisions to make, you know what I mean?
On March 28th, Jim returns to the same wash, the same general corridor, the same grid he had worked before, and this time he finds more. Not one item. Multiple items of clothing in the same location that had already produced a prior discovery. When the online community following this case saw Jim's return to this wash, the reaction was immediate. People who had been tracking the earlier pants understood instantly what it meant that a second discovery had come from the same spot. In investigative terms, a single find can be written off as a coincidence. A cluster of finds concentrated in the same defined area is something categorically different, and that is exactly what the wash behind Annie Guthrie's house is now producing. Jim's approach, the patience, the return visits, the methodical documentation, and represent exactly the kind of disciplined work that has made civilian investigators in this case into something far more than spectators. He is doing the physical work, he is finding things, and he is making the calls to the sheriff that the evidence demands be made. There is a tendency in some corners of official law enforcement communication and mainstream media coverage to treat citizen searchers as amateurs who contaminate active scenes, amplify misinformation, and make the formal investigation harder to manage. That concern has theoretical validity. In this specific case, the actual record does not support it. The record supports Jim. The record supports the people who walked the washes when the official investigation was occupied with press conferences and managing institutional credibility problems. What Jim has delivered to law enforcement twice now is a documented finding in a defined geographic location, photographed in position before being reported, submitted through appropriate channels with a public record that cannot be retroactively minimized or denied. That is responsible evidence handling by a civilian, and it deserves to be recognized as such. Now, the geography needs to be understood carefully because in this investigation, the terrain is not background detail. It is central to everything. The wash behind Annie Guthrie's house runs through a residential area of Tucson within Pima County Sheriff's jurisdiction. A wash, for anyone unfamiliar with the Sonoran Desert and the American Southwest, is a natural drainage channel, what is also called an arroyo. Dry for most of the year, sometimes for years at a stretch, but subject to intense and rapid flash flooding when the monsoon season hits. These channels carve through the desert landscape and wind through residential neighborhoods connecting distant points in ways that roads and sidewalks simply do not. They are embedded in the physical structure of how Tucson is built. You can live adjacent to a wash for years and barely register it. A feature at the back of the property, a break in the fence line, a place where the desert asserts itself even inside a residential grid, and they are notoriously difficult to search thoroughly. Washes in Tucson can be heavily overgrown with palo verde, saguaro skeletons, brittle bush, and creosote. The ground is rocky and uneven. The channel bottom can drop 12 feet below the surrounding grade or sit nearly flush with the landscape. They narrow and widen without warning. They run under road bridges, and because they carry water when the monsoons arrive, they carry everything else with them. Debris, organic material, anything deposited in or near the channel gets moved. A wash can shift an object 50 yards in a single flash flood event. It can bury something under 6 inches of silt. It can also deposit something onto a clear, dry surface that no one would think to examine until a grid searcher walks the full length of it on foot. The wash behind Annie Guthrie's house is significant for one specific reason that needs to be understood clearly. It provides a potential route of movement out of the immediate vicinity of that property without using a road, without a vehicle that would appear on a ring camera, without footprints on pavement, as without a car that could be captured by a license plate reader, and without witnesses at a window who might see someone moving down a residential street in the dark. From the back of that property, through vegetation and rocky terrain, into a natural drainage channel that runs away from the house and connects to a broader wash system extending through the neighborhood. That is a route that would produce no surveillance footage of any kind. And in a case where the central investigative mystery has always been how an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility could have left a property without appearing on any camera, that geographic reality matters enormously. Law enforcement has been aware of this wash since early in the investigation. The prior pants discovery was not the first time investigators or the community were directed toward this drainage corridor. It has been a recurring point of discussion in this case for weeks. And on March 28th, it demanded serious attention again. The pants first, now a jacket.
Look at this though, you guys. Yeah, I don't know if you can see that. You see these spots? I don't know, man. That looks like blood to me.
4 separate finds, multiple items, same wash. The geography is not random and it is not coincidental. It is communicating something that this investigation needs to hear. And here is what gets lost when people discuss this wash in the abstract. Most people analyzing this case from the outside have never physically walked that terrain. A satellite image on a screen is not the same as standing inside a drainage channel and understanding the depth of it, the height of the vegetation growing along the banks, the way sound behaves at night in that environment. The way the landscape absorbs and conceals whatever falls into it. Jim has walked it. He has been in it on foot more than once. And what he found on March 28th did not arrive in that location by accident. Those items were either deposited there with intention or they traveled there from a direction that tells a story about their origin point. Geography does not have an agenda. It does not protect anyone or implicate anyone. It simply holds what is placed in it until someone with the patience to look finds what is there. So let us be precise about what is actually confirmed from the documented post on X made on March 28, 2026 by the account at HopeFaith24, a reply to a true crime account that also tagged Nancy Grace, with photographs included as the basis for what follows. On day 56 of the search for Nancy Guthrie, and Exploring with Jim returned to the wash behind Annie Guthrie's house and found multiple items of clothing. Based on the photographs, those items appear to include a dark jacket and pants. Multiple pieces in the same drainage channel where pants had previously been recovered on a separate date. The photographs document the items as they were found on the ground in the wash, apparently undisturbed, not moved before being photographed. Jim documented them in place and then contacted law enforcement. That is the correct protocol for anyone who locates potential evidence in an active missing persons case. You photograph everything exactly as you found it, and you call it in. The find was reported to the Pima County Sheriff's Department, and that reporting is confirmed in the documented post. Deputies were notified. The line between what is confirmed and what is not must be maintained clearly. What is confirmed is that multiple clothing items were found, that they were photographically documented before being moved,
About
that the
what we have,
photographs
not
show
very
them in
healthy
the wash
either.
behind
Okay, that's
Andy
fine. Not
Guthrie's
healthy
house, and that the sheriff was notified. What is not confirmed is whether these items have any connection to Nancy Guthrie or to the events of February 1st, 2026. That connection has not been established by the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the FBI, or any forensic authority. Establishing it requires physical collection of the items, laboratory testing, potential DNA and fiber analysis, and an official determination. None of that has been publicly reported. What exists right now is a location, a documented pattern of finds at that location across 2 separate dates. Oh, and a notification to the sheriff. That is more than enough to demand serious attention. It is not a conclusion. The community response to this find was immediate and substantive. Within hours of the post, people were cross-referencing maps, measuring distances between the prior pants find and the March 28th discovery, studying the photographs for identifying details, and connecting the geography to everything that has been theorized about movement from that property on the night Nancy disappeared. That is not casual speculation. That is applied investigative reasoning from people who have been working this case intensively for nearly 2 months. The level of analysis this community has consistently produced has exceeded what law enforcement has chosen to share publicly, and that gap is a problem this sheriff's department owns. Men, now to the pattern itself, because this is what investigators should be paying the most serious attention to right now. The wash behind Annie Guthrie's house has produced multiple finds in the context of this investigation. A prior pair of pants recovered from this drainage channel on an earlier date, and now on March 28th, a jacket and additional pants, multiple items, same corridor, different dates. In a missing persons investigation, clustering of physical evidence in one defined geographic area is one of the most significant indicators that investigators look for. It is how you establish a route. It is how you build a timeline of movement. It is how you elevate a location from a peripheral note into a primary investigative focus. A single item found in a wash can be explained as a coincidence, wind displacement, or something left by an unrelated person passing through. That explanation becomes increasingly difficult to sustain when a second separate discovery emerges from the same confined stretch of the same drainage channel on a completely different date. The question that investigators and this community must now ask directly is whether this is a coincidence or whether this is a trail. The investigative methodology applied in comparable cases works backward from physical evidence to determine the route. You find something and you ask how it got there. What direction would material have to travel from its origin point to arrive at the position where it was discovered? In a desert wash system, objects deposited from a specific property tend to follow a predictable path downhill and along the channel. When multiple items appear in the same stretch of that channel, the most logical question is whether they share a common origin and whether that origin is consistent with the property whose backyard connects directly to this wash. Those are not accusations. Those are exactly the questions that forensic analysis and field investigation exist to answer. And they will only receive answers if this sheriff's department engages with this find at the level its documented pattern demands. Washes are also a known element in evidence concealment in cases where material needed to be moved or disposed of quickly and without being observed. Access from a private backyard is straightforward. Visibility is poor at night. There is no pavement to capture footprints, no street lighting to illuminate movement. No camera position to capture what happens at the rear of a residential property and into a drainage channel. If someone needed to move something through that environment without leaving a visible trail, the wash behind a house in this neighborhood makes a specific and grim kind of operational sense. That is not a declaration of what happened. It is a documented pattern of behavior from comparable cases in comparable terrain, and it makes the geographic corridor of this wash a location that requires forensic attention, irrespective of any alternative explanation that might exist. The alternative explanation is precisely what testing will either confirm or rule out. What the pattern requires is that we get that answer. Now the sheriff's notification. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has been notified, and that sentence carries weight that needs to be understood in context. Sheriff Chris Nanos has been the subject of a formal no confidence vote from within his own department, not from outside critics, from the people who work under him. His own deputies formally registered that they do not have confidence in his leadership. Former Pima County Chief Deputy Rick Castigar, someone who knows this department's culture and procedures from direct institutional experience, has spoken publicly and on the record about concerns with how this investigation has been managed. Former Sheriff Dr. Richard Carmona, who held this exact position before Nanos and who served as a United States Surgeon General, stated publicly that the crime scene in this case had been permanently corrupted, not damaged, and not compromised in ways that allow for partial recovery. Permanently corrupted. From a man of his standing and credibility, those are words that carry enormous weight, and they have not been satisfactorily addressed by the current administration of this department. Against that documented institutional backdrop, the statement that the sheriff has been notified is not reassuring. It is a question, because this community has been here before. Fines have been reported, information has been submitted through proper channels, and the public accounting of what happened afterward has been consistently incomplete. The questions that follow this notification are urgent and specific. Did deputies physically go to that wash and examine the site? Did they collect the items and enter them into evidence? Did they document the location independently with their own photographs? Did they connect this discovery to the prior pants find in the same wash and treat the pattern as something requiring systematic investigative attention? Did they coordinate with the FBI? The public does not have documented answers to any of those questions, and that absence is itself a significant problem. The stakes here are straightforward. If these items are collected and forensic testing produces results connecting them to Nancy Guthrie or to the events of February 1st, 2026, that would be a turning point in a case that, after 58 days, still has no confirmed crime scene, no confirmed timeline, and no publicly identified person of interest. If testing determines the items have no connection to the case, that is also valuable because ruling out a theory has investigative worth, and an investigation is supposed to close leads rather than leave them sitting unexamined in a drainage channel. And if those items are not collected at all, if the department that received this notification fails to respond with the seriousness that a second documented clustering of evidence in the same location demands, this community will recognize what that silence means, and it will be reported accordingly. There is an institutional pattern worth naming directly. The Pima County Sheriff's Department did not voluntarily surface information about the prior pants discovery in this wash. The community found it. The department did not proactively identify this drainage corridor as a geographic focus of the investigation. The community identified it. And now, with a second documented find in the same location, the community is again at the front of the information chain, and law enforcement is again responding to what civilians surfaced rather than leading with what official resources produced. That pattern, community discovery, followed by official response, followed by insufficient public communication, followed by the community continuing to work, is the defining pattern of this entire investigation across 58 days. Now back to February 1st. 2026, because that night is what everything in this case radiates from, and the wash behind Annie Guthrie's house is pulling the investigation back to it in a way that cannot be responsibly ignored. What is known about that night is that no surveillance footage clearly captured Nancy leaving her home. A no-ring camera recorded her on a driveway or sidewalk. No neighbor's camera placed her on a street. No vehicle was confirmed to have transported her away from the property. The absence of a clear, visible exit route for an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility has been one of the most persistent and unresolved puzzles of this case, because people do not disappear from inside homes without leaving some traceable evidence of how they departed, unless the route they used was one that no surveillance covered. The back of a property, a fence line, a wash running through residential terrain without cameras, without street lighting, without pavement that holds footprints. In the dark, with knowledge of the terrain, a path through a drainage channel behind a house disappears from the evidentiary record almost immediately after it is used. That is what the geography of the wash behind Annie Guthrie's house represents in investigative terms. A corridor that surveillance never captured, a route that forensic attention is now being directed toward for the second time. A location that is no longer a single isolated find, but a documented and repeating pattern. Retired FBI Special Agent Steve Moore has spoken publicly about the investigative methodology used in comparable nobody cases, the technique of working backward from physical evidence to reconstruct a route. You find an item and you trace the most probable path backward from its discovery point to its origin point, factoring in the terrain and the timing and the physical conditions of that night. The wash behind Annie's house is now offering investigators two separate data points for that backward tracing process. Cized, a prior pants find, and a March 28th discovery of a jacket and additional pants in the same location. The investigative logic of working backward from those cluster points in a consistent and specific direction toward the property at the top of that drainage channel. That is not a conclusion about what happened on February 1st. It is the direction the physical evidence is pointing. And 58 days into a case with no confirmed crime scene and no confirmed route of movement, a direction is significant. Nighttime movement through a wash is also not the same as daytime movement. In a residential area without strong ambient lighting, the concealment this terrain provides increases substantially after dark. What is visible in daylight becomes nearly invisible at night in a Tucson residential neighborhood. A drainage channel running behind a house and away from streetlights, is about as dark as outdoor terrain gets in an urban environment. The February 1st timeline, the geography of this wash, and the now documented pattern of clothing finds in that corridor are three threads that, taken together, define the most pressing investigative priority in this case as of late March 2026. Savannah Guthrie has been the public face of the search for her mother since the earliest days of this investigation. As a Today Show anchor and one of the most recognizable journalists on American television, she brought a level of media access to this case that is unusual for a missing persons investigation involving an elderly woman in Tucson. And she used that access deliberately and strategically in ways that former FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas confirmed were coordinated with law enforcement as an investigative tool. Her public communications have not been unplanned emotional responses. They have been calculated and purposeful. What she said in her Today Show interview reframed parts of this investigation in real time. She said investigators had stood over a bed. That is a specific physical detail implying a defined forensic focus within a specific room in a specific property. She referenced the family actively responding to ransom notes, not dismissing them, which means law enforcement determined those communications had enough credibility to engage with. She described a family navigating something with no clean resolution, no confirmed timeline. Snag and no publicly identified person of interest, a family that has been given information they have chosen not to share publicly. Savannah is a journalist by profession and training. She understands precisely how information moves and how audiences receive it. She knows what to say and, equally importantly, what not to say and when. Her appearances in this case have been measured and deliberate, and the things she has chosen to withhold are as significant as the things she has chosen to share. She returns to the Today Show on April 6th. Whatever she says then, having had time to absorb the most recent developments in the wash behind her sister's property, will warrant very careful attention. Annie Guthrie is the woman who made the call that reported Nancy missing on the morning of February 1st. So, the woman whose property backs directly onto a drainage channel that has now produced multiple clothing finds in an active missing persons investigation. Annie has not been named a suspect by law enforcement. No one has been publicly identified as a suspect in this case. What is being stated here is what the physical geography states. The wash is behind Annie's house. The finds are in that wash. Those are documented facts. And in an investigation where the central mystery has been how an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility left or was removed from a property without appearing on any surveillance, the geography of this wash and the clothing now found in it are facts that cannot be responsibly set aside. Now, here is what this entire analysis has been building toward. The question that has defined this case for 58 days is not simply where Nancy is. It is not even who is responsible. The hardest question, the one that has frustrated every analyst and stalled every institutional response, is this. How do you prove what happened to someone when you have no body, no confirmed crime scene, and no documented route of movement? Nobody homicide cases, and the experts in this field have said this publicly and repeatedly in the context of this investigation and in comparable cases, turn on physical evidence, not confessions, not eyewitness accounts. Physical evidence that places someone, documents movement, and connects a location to a victim in a way that survives forensic scrutiny and holds up in a courtroom. A piece of clothing, a fiber, a trace. The kind of material that a grid searcher walking the same corridor twice can recover from a desert drainage channel that official searches may have passed over because they were looking for something more obvious or simply were not looking at the right terrain at all. If law enforcement collects these items from the wash behind Annie Guthrie's house, and it must be stated clearly that it is not yet publicly confirmed whether they have, and if forensic testing produces results, and if those results connect this clothing to the events of February 1st, 2026, to Nancy Guthrie herself, or to any person or location relevant to this investigation, then that wash becomes something different from what it is today. It becomes a scene, an actual documentable, forensically supported scene in a case that has not had one for 58 days. Now, it becomes evidence of how someone moved or was moved, evidence of a route, evidence of disposal or concealment, evidence that places the physical story of this investigation in a specific and defined geography in a drainage channel behind a specific property in a way that law enforcement would be compelled to address seriously and completely. After 58 days, after a formal no-confidence vote against the sheriff from within his own department, after a former United States Surgeon General declared the crime scene permanently corrupted, after every lead that appeared ready to break this case open became another waiting game, a YouTuber with a camera went back to a wash he had already searched and found more clothing in the same place. The sheriff has been notified. What the sheriff does with that notification is the test. And not just of this investigation, but of this institution. If the Pima County Sheriff's Department collects this evidence, processes it through forensic analysis, and communicates the results to the public with the transparency this case demands, that is accountability. If the items sit unprocessed and unacknowledged, this community will recognize what that silence means. This community is not passive. It is not waiting quietly. It is watching every press conference, every tip line, every stretch of desert wash. The sheriff has been notified. Everyone is watching what comes next. The contribution of citizen investigators and the engaged online community to this case deserves direct recognition. Not one of the significant investigative threads that has emerged publicly in this case over 58 days began with an official press release. The FBI gun store name list was surfaced through community channels before law enforcement publicly addressed it. The blood forensic analysis, the specific drop patterns, and what they indicate about velocity and origin point was being worked through in detail by this community long before any official forensic accounting appeared publicly. The University of Arizona Athletics label, spotted in evidence footage by an online investigator who stated she was confident enough to submit it to authorities, came entirely from community analysis of publicly available material. The flashlight in mouth behavioral detail that pointed toward a specific type of worker with a specific kind of site familiarity was a community identification. And the wash behind Annie's house has been searched on foot, in the sun, through the brush, by a YouTuber who returned to the same ground because he understood that terrain changes and that a single pass is not enough. Every one of those threads forced law enforcement to respond, acknowledge, or clarify. That is citizen journalism operating at a level this case demanded, and it deserves recognition rather than dismissal. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. That fact sits at the center of everything this community has built across 58 days of searching, analyzing, submitting tips, walking washes, and refusing to look away. If you have any information about her disappearance, please contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line or the Tucson FBI
The new
field
tips
office
have flooded in.
directly at
Authorities still going through
1-800-CALL
them.
FBI. The combined reward is over $1 million, completely anonymous. No individual has been named or implied as a suspect in this video. All unverified community observations have been explicitly identified as unconfirmed. Everything presented here is based on publicly available sources, including documented social media posts, verified mainstream media reporting, and on-the-record statements from named credentialed sources. Nancy Guthrie is not forgotten, and this investigation is not over.